Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Welcome to Rainforest Action Network's briefing on our work in the Leuser ecosystem. I'm Zan Garland, the Development Director at RAN. I'm really glad to be here with you today. And as we hear from our colleagues, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will address questions at the end of the webinar. So this year at RAN, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary, which is 40 years of campaigning for people and planet. In 2025, we released a major report on over a decade of successful forest campaigning in Indonesia, particularly Sumatra's Leuser ecosystem, which is what we'll be discussing today. Also this year, our climate and energy team saw many campaign wins as we pushed Chubb Insurance to back out of insuring multiple disastrous methane build-out projects in the Gulf South. And our annual Banking on Climate Chaos report revealed an increase in financing for fossil fuels for the first time in 3 years, unfortunately. Our Community Action Grants program dispersed 75 grants in 14 countries across 5 continents for over $825,000 supporting Indigenous and frontline community-led work. And in the coming year, we're going to be building new coalitions in Eastern Indonesia. We'll be enhancing our efforts to halt the build out of methane expansion. We'll be supporting Indigenous groups to attend and participate in the 30th UN Conference on Climate Change. And we'll be producing new investigative research and highly visible reports to hold bad corporate actors accountable and to support the future that we all want to see. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you so much again for joining us today and for all of your support of RAN. And I'm excited to hand it over to my colleague Robin, our Forest Program Director, to give you some context for today's update. Robin?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm very excited to introduce you to RAN's Forest Program and share how we're keeping some of the world's critical forests standing. Forests aren't just trees, they're communities, their cultures, and their life itself. RAN's North Star goal is simple. We aim to protect tropical biodiversity and defend the rights of Indigenous and traditional peoples to manage their territories. This means standing with communities who are saying no to industrial logging, no to palm oil plantations, and no to other forest risk commodities in areas that are still intact and full of life. We tackle this challenge on 3 fronts. First, we pressure banks and brands that finance deforestation to adopt strong policies on no deforestation, no peatland expansion, and no exploitation. Secondly, we work directly with Indigenous and local communities, supporting their efforts to protect their lands. And third, we dig deep. We research, we expose the bad actors, and we strengthen accountability systems so that promises on paper become real protections on the ground. 2 major initiatives drive our work. The Keep Forests Standing campaign targets the world's most influential banks and brands, pushing them to respect community rights and stop financing forest destruction. The Forest and Finance Coalition brings together organizations worldwide to track financial flows, push for reforms, and hold the financial sector accountable for deforestation. Our focus spans Indonesia, Brazil, Japan, and the US. In Indonesia, decades of partnerships have helped protect Indigenous territories. In Brazil, we're building strong local alliances and leveraging finance campaigns to hold major agribusiness companies accountable. And in Japan and the US, we're connecting forests, finance, brands, and human rights while growing the movement and energizing supporters like you. This work is about more than forests alone. It's about justice, it's about rights, and it's about protecting the homes of communities and wildlife alike. Every agreement we secure, every company we hold accountable, every bank we reform brings us closer to a world where forests can thrive and communities can live with dignity. Thank you for being here today. We're excited to share more about our campaigns, our strategies, and the incredible people that make this possible. I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Laurel Sutherland, who has played an instrumental role in the work to protect the Leuser ecosystem. Over to you, Laurel.
Thank you, Robin. Hello, everybody. I am always delighted to spend time talking about the extraordinary realm known as the Leuser ecosystem, as I have come to love this landscape dearly over the years. For those who may not be familiar yet, the Leuser ecosystem spans over 6.5 million acres of tropical forests on the northern tip of the island of Sumatra in Indonesia. Most famously, the Leuser is known as the last place on Earth where critically endangered Sumatran orangutans, tigers, elephants, and rhinoceros still coexist together in the wild. But even beyond these iconic wildlife species that most people are familiar with, the Leuser is one of the most ancient forested ecosystems on planet Earth. And that has allowed the Leuser to grow over the millennia into a global biodiversity hotspot. And it's just an incredible sensation to be in the forest. It's a cacophony of sounds with a dazzling array of birds and bugs, plants, animals, and lots of sounds that you can't figure out what they are. Next slide, please. The Leuser also provides critical natural resources that are crucial to the livelihoods and the well-being of millions of people in local communities across the provinces of Aceh and North Sumatra that surround and encompass the Leuser. And finally, the Leuser is of real deep importance to everyone in the entire world because it is home to large areas of peatland swamps. And peatlands are a unique kind of ecosystem that is wet on the ground that never naturally experience wildfire. And so these peatlands that surround the Leuser are often 10, 20, 30 plus feet deep in peat. And that peat is nearly pure carbon. And so left alone, this provides all of us with an incredible natural service of carbon sequestration on a massive scale. But of course, the flip side of that is that when these peat regions are drained of water and lit on fire, which tragically is the most common way that palm oil plantations are established there, then those fires burn out of control and they can release catastrophic quantities of carbon pollution into the atmosphere, enough to be a globally significant contribution to the climate crisis. Next slide, please. So that palm oil that I just mentioned, the expansion of industrial palm oil plantations has long been the primary driver of deforestation in the Leuser ecosystem. And this has led over the decades into a perfect storm of habitat destruction, climate pollution, as well as human rights violations and widespread conflicts between plantation companies and local and indigenous communities. So early in our efforts on this issue, Rand coined the term conflict palm oil, which is palm oil linked to all those things I just mentioned, illegal clearing, land grabbing, labor abuses. And we did this to make a distinction between conflict palm oil, which we want to stop, and truly responsible palm oil, which of course is palm oil produced in a manner not associated with all of these things. And it's an important distinction because responsible palm oil is absolutely possible if the big companies buying it with the big money take the issue seriously and insist on nothing but that in their supply chains. Slide, please. So Rand's involvement in the Leuser ecosystem began way back in 2012 in response to an urgent call from help that we received from allies in Indonesia, who alerted us to a crisis unfolding where these industrial fires that I spoke of were clearing large areas of land for plantations. This was a place that had, at the time, the highest concentration of orangutans left in the world. And when we came to understand what an internationally important issue this really was, we started to dig in and we did what RAND does best, which was to collect concrete evidence of the destruction underway, and then to connect the dots and follow the money from those points of destruction all the way back to the huge global brands ultimately driving the demand. And so Rand's research began to expose major brands, household names like Nestle, PepsiCo, Unilever, Mars, and many others. We can do slide. And so we'll fill in the blanks about how we did it, got there, but to skip ahead to the punchline a little bit, ultimately, this decade plus of efforts in concert with the work of our allies in Indonesia and internationally led to over 200 major companies across the palm oil sector from top to bottom, adopting what it has become to be called no deforestation, no peatlands, no exploitation policies, known as NDPE policies. And it's a little bit wonky, but the reason this was a big deal was because previously there had been no, industry standard. There'd been an ad hoc patchwork of commitments, some public, some not, many not inclusive of human rights issues. And so what NDPE did is it established a model that did become that industry benchmark of what responsible palm oil production actually needed to look like. Slide, please. And so when we started this work, the Leuser ecosystem was a very obscure place outside of Indonesia. And so we set out to put the Leuser onto the map of the global imagination. And one thing we wanted to do was to raise the profile of this special place to such a degree that no corporate leader or political leader would want to be associated with its destruction. So one of the things we did early on is we helped to recruit and identify and train a team of field investigators to collect evidence in remote areas and identify who the actors were out there on the plantations and on the front lines of forest destruction. And we did things like we commissioned cutting edge satellite monitoring imagery so that we could track forest loss in real time. And we tracked ships across oceans to see from the mills to the ports where this palm oil was going. And we engaged in supply chain tracing so that we could tie this issue to the front doors of corporate headquarters, largely in the US and Europe. And so crucial to our theory of change is that we know these big brands pour literally hundreds of millions of dollars a year into advertising for their flagship products. So whether it's Pepsi Cola or Dove soap or Oreo cookies or etc., they are very sensitive, these brands, about the reputational risk when people start associating these treasured assets with things like orangutan extinction or rainforest destruction. And so we began to publish detailed research reports and established our own watchdog site called Leuser Watch and began to produce a steady drumbeat of breaking news scandals that named and shamed our corporate targets. And so over the years, we started to achieve high profile coverage. I think you can do next slide, including, I think we can even do one more. There we go. So we had, everything from Reuters and CNN to The Guardian and National Geographic and many others. And almost certainly the highest exposure we achieved was through convincing Leonardo DiCaprio to include a full segment on the Leuser and palm oil in his climate documentary called Before the Flood. And that went on to become the most widely watched documentary in the history of documentaries. And then Leo followed up by taking a personal trip to the Leuser ecosystem. He brought his mom and some famous friends, which helped generate tremendous global exposure and also a significant amount of funding into the efforts. Next slide, yeah. But we know at RAND that in our David versus Goliath struggle against these massive corporations, that even all that research and media coverage alone is not enough to move these multi-billion-dollar behemoths. And to do that, we needed to generate a swarm of people-powered actions to strategically pressure the decision makers. Next slide. So we're moving through this quickly, and I could spend we could spend hours telling stories of all the actions that we engaged with throughout this campaign, but I'll give a sampling to highlight, given a flavor. We started with a lot of online tactics. We did social media swarms. We did review bombs on new product launches. We created a catchy video of an orangutan using sign language that went viral and garnered more than 1 million views. At one point, we laid siege to the town of Wayzata, Minnesota, because that's where Cargill was based, a giant commodity, company that we were targeting. And we orchestrated a swarm of refugee orangutan mannequins in prominent places that were very hard to remove all over town. And we showed up over and over in person at shareholder meetings and corporate headquarters with peaceful protests, civil disobedience actions, things the companies could just not possibly ignore. Including on the last slide, you saw one of our most high-profile actions. We dropped a 100-foot banner that said "Cut Conflict Palm Oil" beneath the iconic neon PepsiCo sign that's on the East River facing the Manhattan skyline. And that got widespread TV coverage that PepsiCo had to respond to. So that was a very quick journey through our efforts, and we'd be happy to talk to you more if you have questions. But I want to switch into some of the results of those efforts and why some people have started to call the Leuser a landscape of hope. And this slide here shows sort of one of the most empirical things we can show is a decline in the rates of deforestation in the last decade since we began this campaign. You can see a spike during COVID era when there was less scrutiny, out in the field. But generally, we've seen a steady decline for many reasons, including our campaign efforts. Next slide. But one of the most exciting and auspicious developments over this 10 plus years of fighting to protect the Leuser occurred just last month with the launch of a landscape level conservation agreement called the Aceh Sustainable Palm Oil Working Group. And this initiative is the first time that all the players involved in palm oil production in the Leuser ecosystem have joined forces under a shared vision. So this includes local and regional government leaders, local environmental and human rights groups that are part of civil society. It also includes farmers groups, but the linchpin is that it includes participation and significant financial backing from many of the same brands that RAN has spent years targeting, notably PepsiCo, Unilever, and others. And so we're excited because this new form of agreement holds promise because it brings together, instead of trying to purge individual bad actors from the supply chains or to close loopholes in individual companies, this initiative allows all the actors at once, focused on the whole landscape level, to coordinate across the whole supply chain and to look into the long term. So it's a young and fragile initiative, but we're very hopeful for the promise that it holds. And we've already seen that this landscape level approach to conservation has resulted both in tens of thousands of acres of primary rainforest set aside that would have already been cleared, as well as thousands of acres of restoration, where formerly illegal palm oil plantations have now been converted back in a matter of short years into viable orangutan habitat. So I will stop for now there and turn back over to Robin to talk about how we can expand this model forward.
Thanks, Laurel. Yeah, so the lessons learned from the Leuser ecosystem will inform RAND's work in other critical ecosystems across Indonesia and beyond. This includes work in some of the world's most important and threatened intact forest landscapes, including in eastern Indonesia and the Amazon. RAND's committed to ensuring that our future conservation efforts are rights-based, transparent, and accountable, building from the Leuser model, and will continue to build our work from the ground up, working directly with Indigenous and local communities. And you all are the fuel behind our work, so your continued support as supporters is critical to meeting the challenges ahead. We look forward to your partnership on RAND's campaigns, and we look forward to holding corporations accountable and keeping forests standing together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laurel and Robin. And not only do I always get so impressed when I see that beautiful downward trend of deforestation, but also that you all can be able to represent 10 years of incredible campaigning in about 19 minutes. So good job, team. We'll have some time for some questions. I'd like to introduce you all to my colleague, Emily, who's the Director of Individual Giving, and she will kick us off with our first question.
Awesome. Thank you, Zan, and for that powerful presentation, Robin and Laurel. Always so great to hear you talk about this amazing work. And just a reminder to folks, if you have questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the Q&A box now. We had quite a few come in throughout the presentation. And this first one is one that we get pretty often. So maybe I'll ask you, Laurel, when a product lists palm oil as an ingredient, how can we know if it is dangerously extracted or done so responsibly before doing the research to buy it? And then kind of a follow-up to that is very common question we receive and did in the chat is around boycotts and if people should be thinking about just boycotting palm oil completely.
Yeah, so this is a very natural response to hearing about how destructive palm oil is. And I think, I would say avoiding palm oil is probably a healthy thing to do. It's largely in heavily processed foods. And so if you stick to, grains and vegetables, you're going to be better off anyway. But the reality is, palm oil at this point is found in roughly half of all packaged products in a grocery store. And it's also listed on ingredient lists in over 200 different ingredient names, many of which do not have the word palm or oil in them. So it's completely ubiquitous and almost impossible to avoid. And so, we've been clear just on a theory of change strategy level from the beginning that we're not running a boycott campaign. Obviously people should make their own choices and we wouldn't discourage anyone from trying to avoid palm oil. But it's very difficult. And also, we've really found that a relatively small amount of people who are strategically communicating, their concerns directly to decision makers at the company can have a much more disproportionate effect than even if we had tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people reading labels and trying not to buy palm oil. It's so ubiquitous that the company's not going to receive that message or know why that's happening. It could be because you don't like trans fats or because, you're avoiding trans fats, something, Um, so, uh, yeah, so we really encourage folks to, especially if you do avoid palm oil, make sure that the message why is getting to the companies responsible, because that's where the impact is going to happen.
Thanks so much, Laurel. Really appreciate understanding that better. We've been getting a lot of questions about where we work and kind of why Indonesia, why are we focusing there, why in Brazil? Do we work to stop deforestation anywhere else, or why are we focusing there? Robin, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Thanks, Zan, and thanks for the question, everyone. Yeah, so RAN, in a sense, we work on forests globally because all of the policies we negotiate with companies are global policies. So a company like PepsiCo, a company like Unilever, they buy products from all over the world that impact forests all over the world. So in that respect, our work does have an impact on all forests globally, or at least all of the forests in which the companies that we target touch. But we have a very specific focus in Indonesia where we've worked for 15 years. And part of what brought our focus there in around 2008 was the fact that it had become the third largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. As Laurel had mentioned earlier, at that time, there was a uh, very significant deforestation rates, but also cutting and burning of peatlands, which created a massive carbon bomb in the atmosphere. And at that time, and still today, palm oil and pulp and paper were the main drivers of deforestation. And so it was a very important moment for market signals and for consumers from across the world to send a message that we wanted products that weren't linked to deforestation, weren't linked to carbon emissions, and weren't linked to human rights violations. And so that brought our focus deeply into Indonesia, where our work has remained. RAN works very, very closely with frontline communities. And so the work really starts from the ground up. We're merging a global model in which we look at global supply chains, global finance, how they're driving the impacts, but then we're working very, very closely with the people who are on the front lines of those impacts in country. So Indonesia remains a focus. It's still one of the most important tropical forest countries that's experiencing high rates of deforestation. And then the Amazon, and particularly the Brazilian Amazon, is the second place where our work is deepening. And that is because it's the world's largest rainforest ecosystem and also critically threatened. In that case, soy and beef are the two main drivers of deforestation. So our work is targeting some of the financiers who are enabling that deforestation from major companies in the Amazon.
Thanks, Robin. That seems like a good segue. You mentioned supply chain and kind of the global scope of the work we're doing with our companies. There's a number of questions about the supply chains in the chat, so let me try to consolidate a bit. But can you talk to us a little bit about how we kind of look at supply chains and figure out what's going into them? For the products they're producing? And then do companies try to hide their supply chains, or are they more transparent with where these products are coming from? Laurel, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure I understand. I mean, I think in the question of this particular case in the Leuser and with palm oil, we, as I sort of glossed over, we had to build quite an infrastructure, with on the ground folks, in the field, going into remote areas, taking photos of license plates, collecting GPS locations, following trucks from plantations to drop-off sites, and then, connecting the dots all the way through. It's a very complex and kind of spider web of a supply chain by the time palm oil actually gets into a giant ship and then makes its way into the products of a company like a PepsiCo or a Nestle. So it took, a lot of learning and finding the right people to be able to put all those pieces together, and also to be able to have that unassailable evidence, to be able to not be able to be have that evidence questioned when we come present it to a company and say, here's proof that you are complicit in the destruction that we're talking about. Because yes, if they can find a way to say, well, there's a gap here, or we don't know where that comes from. And so a lot of the efforts that we've been doing have been trying to achieve true traceability and transparency in supply chains. And we've kind of been filling in, and most recently, sometimes the term gets used, the last mile of the supply chain, which can be the hardest part of actually kind of following a particular palm tree that's in an illegal location, into through that supply chain. So, so that's been very complicated, and it took a lot of infrastructure build out, and research and learning to get that in place for the Leuser. And yes, these companies don't reveal their supply chains out of the goodness of their corporate hearts. They do it because they are, forced by consumer pressure and, a risk benefit analysis where they think it's going to be better for them to look like they're doing the right thing, than to continue to be the target of these kind of campaigns. And so it's totally crucial that people are, asking the right questions and making demands, so that they come clean on that. And something like palm oil, well, anyway, maybe I'll leave it to Robin to, if you fill in if you want. I think Robin's really probably more of the expert on this issue than I am.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about supply chains, and if you you want to know about them, we can talk for a long time. But just to add a little bit of context about this campaign, looking back historically. So when we started the Conflict Palm Oil campaign in 2013, we would take these grievances to the company saying, you have deforestation here, you have labor abuses here, you have a land conflict here. And it would take them weeks or months to even understand if this supplier was potentially in their supply chain. And fast forward to the current time, and these companies are able to, they know their supply chains, which usually contain thousands of mills. They are monitoring their suppliers using satellite monitoring, so they can actually detect deforestation in real time, and they are able to deploy a response within 24 hours. So that's not to say that that's always happening and that there's full responsibility, but the amount of change that we've seen from a decade ago, when this issue was barely known about, companies were not seeing it as something that they had to take responsibility for. And then we built a huge campaign with many of you, many partners around the world, pressured these companies, got them to adopt the standards that Laurel said, and now we are seeing the real impacts of that. They are monitoring, they understand for the most part if deforestation is happening, and they're responding to it. And as a result, we've seen deforestation rates go down across a number of landscapes, not just the Leuser.
That's a really exciting point to end on. Thank you so much for that information about supply chains and how the work that we're doing doesn't just affect one place in the world. It's right at 3:30 or 3:30 Eastern time, and 30 after the hour wherever you are. So we're going to go ahead and close, but we've gotten so many great questions in the chat and the Q&A. So we are going to send a recording as a follow-up to this, and would love to be in touch with you with questions we did not get to. We really want to stay in touch and are really excited about the turnout and the engagement we've had at this webinar. So thank you all so much for coming today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.